Hello and welcome to our webcast. I'm Amy Pendergrass with Moss Adams, and I'm going to get us started for today's session, 2023 Medicare Regulatory Update, IPPS Proposed Rule. Before we begin, I'm going to play our housekeeping video.
Welcome, and thanks for joining us. We're pleased to present another in our ongoing series of continuing professional education webcasts to help companies and individuals conquer challenges as they plan for what's next. Our presentation will start in a few moments. Before we begin, here are a few things to keep in mind. You can customize how you both view our presentation and interact with the presenter. For better viewing, close all other applications and turn up your speaker volume. You can also adjust window size and placement or enter full screen mode using the controls at the top of the window or dragging the bottom right-hand corner to resize. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a series of icons, each relating to a different aspect of our session. You can download the group attendance sheet and a PDF copy of today's slides from the slide deck and handouts widget to the right of the slide view. You can ask our presenter questions during the webcast by typing a question in the Q&A window below the slide view and clicking submit. We'll do our best to answer all questions during the presentation or follow up via email. If you experience technical difficulty during today's presentation, refresh your browser by hitting the F5 key. Today's session will offer you 1 CPE credit. To receive credit, you must meet the requirements as specified by the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy. You must attend at least 50 minutes of the session and respond to at least 75% of the polling questions, which we'll ask throughout today's presentation. To respond to a poll, click the button next to your answer. We'll track your progress and alert you when you've earned CPE credit. You can then click the certificate icon in the CPE Progress widget to open a PDF file that you can save to your computer. Don't worry if you can't download your PDF certificate today. We'll email a copy to you in 2 weeks. If you're attending this webcast in a group, you must complete our attendance sheet to receive CPE credit. The attendance sheet is available in the slide deck and handouts widget. Please have all group members sign it and send only 1 sheet per group. Also note that CPE credit can be awarded only to participants registered as themselves and isn't available to participants who view the on-demand version. As a reminder, the presentation you're about to see isn't legal, investment, or accounting advice. We encourage you to seek the counsel of a professional service provider to apply this content to your specific circumstances.
All right, and now I would like to turn the floor over to one of today's presenters, Mike Newell, partner at Moss Adams. Mike?
Thank you, Amy. Hello, and welcome everyone for joining today. I'm Michael Newell. I'm a partner in Moss Adams Reimbursement Consulting practice. I've worked in healthcare financial management since 1982, and I focus primarily on reimbursement enterprise solutions to hospitals and health systems, including Medicare DISH and Worksheet S10, cost reporting, and outsourced reimbursement solutions. Joining me today is Glenn Bunting. Glenn is a managing director in Moss Adams Reimbursement Practice. Glenn has over 30 years experience in healthcare finance with a specialty in Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement. Also joining me today is Jonathan Mason. Jonathan has worked in healthcare finance since 2004 with a concentration in government reimbursement. He specifically focuses on Medicare DISH and S10. And with that, let's talk a little bit about what we're going to try to cover today. We have a lot of material. We'll start with a quick update on a few items that go into the development of the Msdrgs. And then we'll move on to the proposed updates to the rates. And there's a lot here to focus on, given some of the big offsets that are being proposed, and both Glenn and Jonathan will be getting into that a little bit more. From there, we'll talk a little about some of the proposed changes to GME, specifically related to the proposed retroactive changes associated with the court's decision in the Milton Hershey Medical Center case. We'll then go through the proposed changes related to wage index, and that will include not only the changes related to fiscal year 2023, but also some forward-looking considerations. And at that point, we'll turn it over to Jonathan, and we'll start digging into the changes related to the Medicare DSH and the uncompensated care pool calculation. And we'll be touching on the proposed rule as well as some updates surrounding the current ongoing round of worksheet S10 audits. And you also may recall that CMS had previously proposed some changes to how they were going to count Section 1115 waiver days in the Medicaid fraction. They previously proposed that, but it was not enacted. But they're back again proposing something a little bit different, and Jonathan's going to cover that as well. And then we'll just spend a short time touching on a few of the other items that are proposed to be changed, although in and of itself they can create a webinar alone. And then if we have time, we'll address some questions. So certainly include your questions in the question box. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Amy to kind of get us started, level set a little bit on our first polling question.
All right, thank you. So our first polling question is: staffing continues to be a challenge, which can make keeping up with regulatory changes difficult. Sorry about that. How would you describe your Medicare reimbursement staffing right now? A, we need help in a bad way. B, we are short a few positions. C, we are short but okay. D, we are fully staffed. Or E, not applicable. And to respond, please click the button next to the answer you choose and hit the submit button. And if you can't see the submit button, you will need to enlarge the slide area in your console. And we'll leave this up another 5 seconds or so to make sure everyone gets CPE. And I do see some responses coming through the Q&A. You do need to respond on the actual slide in order for it to be tracked for your CPE. All right, here are the results.
All right, I think not surprising, there's some stress in the system with regard to with resources, and we've certainly seen that and talked to people about that. I hope that we'll be able to fill some gaps today and also in the future. If something comes up that we can assist with, please reach out. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and now turn it over to Glenn Bunting, and he's going to take us through a series of slides related to the IPPS payment updates.
All right. Thanks, Mike, and good day, everyone. And welcome to our presentation. We're going to start off here by discussing the changes to Msdrgs. Good news. I guess this is good news. I guess maybe some might say it's not so great news, but there are no new Msdrgs proposed in fiscal year 2023. The Msdrg list in use in fiscal year 2022 is proposed to remain the same for fiscal year 2023. There are currently 767 Msdrgs in use currently. CMS is proposing to implement limits on decreases to the Msdrg values issued each year. This proposed action is meant to create stability and consistency within the overall payment structure. It's been a concept of discussion by CMS over a period of time where they have considered limiting these decreases by as small as 5% and as large as 20%, but ultimately CMS has landed at a proposed 10% Msdrg cap limit. This means no Msdrg values in fiscal year 2023 will be less than 10% of its value in fiscal year 2022. And kind of as a side note, CMS is and has been implementing payment limit caps across many programs, primarily in the wage index factor space the last few years, and we're seeing this applied in many of the proposed rules issued last month. There's another concept called splitting DRGs. CMS has implemented a process to split or refine Msdrgs if certain criteria are met. There are currently 41 Msdrgs that could be split 3 ways into 123 new Msdrgs. CMS is looking at this, but they're proposing in this rule to place this process on hold due to variations in the data that they believe have resulted from the public health pandemic. However, CMS will revisit this concept in future rulemaking. And then finally, CMS is returning back to its normal course and will use the fiscal year 2021 MedPAR claims data and the fiscal year 2020 cost report data for this fiscal year 2023 Medicare payment rate setting. In terms of annual recalibrations, Msdrg values and the resulting calculated payments are recalibrated each year using, again, 2 primary sources, the fiscal year 2021 MedPAR claims and the fiscal year 2020 Medicare cost reports. In this cycle for 2023, certain adjustments or modifications are proposed to account for anticipated declines in COVID-19 hospitalizations of Medicare beneficiaries. CMS has come up with 2 sets of weights that are being calculated, one including and one excluding COVID-19 claims. They're also going to apply a modification for determining the fiscal 2023 outlier fixed loss amount. And then again, with all of these changes that they're implementing, no Msdrg will be reduced by more than 10% of its value in a given year. Every year, it seems there are changes to new technology payments. This cycle is no different. Here's how the proposed rule for fiscal year 2023 stacks up. There are 11 previous approved technologies that will be discontinued. There are 15 previous approved technologies that will continue to be approved. And there are 13 previous approved technologies that received a 1-year extension due to the pandemic. These 13 extended new technologies will be discontinued. And then finally, there are 26 new drug and other device technologies that are being considered for the new technology add-on payment in fiscal year 2023. My advice is to get familiar with all of these technology add-on payments. It seems like the true numbers are increasing right now, at least looking back at this information historically. We're going to get into the payment rates. If you are a meaningful electronic health record user and you successfully participate in the hospital inpatient quality reporting program, the IPPS base rate payments are proposed to increase 3.2% in fiscal year 2023 as compared to the current fiscal year 2022. So according to the CMS impact file, there are 48 IPPS hospitals not meeting the inpatient quality reporting, and there are 184 IPPS hospitals not meeting the EHR criteria. Nationwide, we have 3,214 hospitals listed in the CMS impact file as IPPS hospitals. Thus, we have a ratio of about 92.8% of hospitals nationwide satisfying both criteria and will receive the full 3.2% increase. The 3.2% increase to the base rate payment is itemized as follows. We have a market basket increase of 3.1%. There's a negative 0.4% multi-factor productivity adjustment that's applied. And then finally, there's a legislative 0.5% positive adjustment applied. However, there are other payment changes that may lead you to receive an increase or possibly a decrease in your fiscal year 2023 payments, again, as compared to the current fiscal year 2022. In the aggregate, we have $800 million of decrease applicable to DISH and UC payments. There's another $800 million decrease proposed for the new technologies. And then finally, there's a $600 million decrease proposed to Medicare-dependent hospitals and low-volume hospitals. The net result would be a decline in all payments if all the categories above are applied. In other words, CMS's new aggregate payments are less in fiscal year 2023 than fiscal year 2022 if other payment streams outside of the increases to the base rates are considered. We'll go into more in-depth conversation on the changes to DISH and UC later in this presentation. So on your screen, you should be able to see the itemized changes to the labor, non-labor, and capital payment rates as proposed in fiscal year 2023 and compared to the current payment rates for fiscal year 2022. So for illustrative purposes, I have to disclose that we are showing the payment rates for the larger group, the 92.8% of hospitals that meet the CMS quality reporting and EHR requirements. We've broken this payment rate comparison between hospitals that have a wage index factor greater than 1 and those that have a wage index factor equal to or less than 1. The base rates are the same at $6,796.06 for both types of providers. However, the labor related component is greater for providers that have a wage index factor, again, greater than 1. In this slide, we've demonstrated how CMS calculates their labor and non-labor payment rates annually. CMS starts with last year's labor and non-labor base rates after removing all prior year reduction factors. CMS then applies this year's market basket update and annual changes to the budget neutrality adjustment factors that account for various policy initiatives as listed on the slide. Finally, CMS has to implement legislative factors as passed into law by Congress. So as you may recall in a previous slide, I stated that the new market basket increase for fiscal year 2023 is 3.2%. Within this table or this slide, this value is a sum of the 1.027 value near the top of the slide and the 1.005 legislative value at the bottom of the slide. So if we dive into the update, this slide is really intended to show the financial impact of to various hospitals nationwide that meet both the quality data submitted and the meaningful user, and then those that don't. So in the first column, we have the 2.7% increase that is applied to the calculations from the previous slide. But in the second column, this is meant to show what the impact is if you're not a meaningful user. So instead of receiving the 2.7% market basket increase, these hospitals receive only a 0.375% increase to their annual base rate values. And there are approximately, there are 184 hospitals that are in this category nationwide. The third column is for those hospitals not reporting quality data only. And again, instead of receiving a 2.7% market basket increase, these hospitals receive a 1.925% increase to their base rate values. We have 27 hospitals that fall into this category. And then finally, there's a handful of hospitals that don't report quality data, and they're not considered meaningful users. So instead of receiving the 2.7% market basket increase, these hospitals actually receive a 0.4% decrease to their base rate values. We have 21 hospitals in this category nationwide. And with respect to those 21 hospitals in this last category, their base rate adjustment continues to be in negative territory year after year. Therefore, their base rate continues to decrease year over year. Unless your Medicare patient volume is extremely low, it would be very difficult to maintain operations in an environment where your Medicare payment is being cut annually while costs continue to increase annually. We have a slide here. Some of you may have seen this in the past. It's here to illustrate in a simplistic or maybe not so simplistic manner, you decide on that point, CMS's IPPS payment methodology. The first step is in the shaded box. You need to determine if your hospital receives a wage index factor that's greater than 1 or less than / equal to 1. This determination will guide you to the appropriate labor and non-labor base rates you use in your payment calculations. Second, you multiply the base labor rate by your wage index factor. If you're lucky enough to have your facility reside in Alaska or Hawaii, you get the benefit of a COLA factor. That's also multiplied to that result. And from here, you multiply everything to date by the applicable Msdrg weight to arrive at your gross payment values. There's other payment items that will likely be applied to your remittance advices, such as a capital payment, disproportionate share, if that's applicable, outliers, if that's applicable, and then, of course, GME and IME, if those are applicable. So speaking of outliers, CMS has a target goal each year to pay outlier payments at 5.1% of operating DRG payments. So consequently, CMS evaluates their payments in the preceding year and adjusts the outlier payment thresholds up or down accordingly. In the current year, fiscal year 2022, CMS set a final outlier threshold at $30,988. In fiscal year 2023, CMS is proposing an outlier threshold of $43,214. So this is really an unprecedented 39% increase in the annual outlier threshold value. But it also reflects impacts from the COVID-19 pandemic. CMS is modifying their methodology for calculating payments on outlier cases within the IPPS to account for data uniquely impacted by COVID-19. And CMS is using data from pre-COVID years, that would be from 2018 and 19 in their outlier payment calculations. Overall, this is a bit of bad news. It's just going to make it a little bit tougher in the coming year to qualify for outlier payments if the threshold of $43,214 or an amount thereof stays in play. So from here, we're going to really kind of have a short touch on changes in GME and IME payments. Many of the points on this slide have been disclosed in previous final rules and also in our most recent speaking engagements. But as this information is tied to information in the fiscal year 2023 IPPS proposed rule, we're providing you with a short recap. One of the major items is really in the first arrow here, which says that CMS proposes to adopt a new GME payment formula retroactively for cost reporting periods beginning on or after October 1st, 2001. So again, that's going to cover, it looks like it's going to cover all open or unaudited cost reports and possibly even cost reports that can be reopened. What they're going to do is they're going to make an adjustment to make the total weighted FTE count equal the FTE cap in certain situations. This revision is a mathematical revision at the heart of it, and it's to the allowable current year FTE counts on old worksheet E3, Part 4, and the current worksheet E-4, depending upon your cost reporting year. Also, in terms of GME, CMS is going to permit GME affiliation agreements for urban and rural teaching hospitals that train residents in a rural track program. So this is something new, and in my opinion, it's long overdue. CMS is also going to propose to cap the pool of funds available for nursing and allied health Medicare Advantage payments for calendar years 2020 and 2021 at the $60 million cap that is imposed by law in the Balanced Budget Refinement Act of 1999. That one slipped through. That is an item that was, I'll just say, out of sync for a number of years until just recent years. Now it's on CMS's radar. And then finally, CMS proposes to reduce the Medicare Advantage GME payments to hospitals by 3.71% for calendar year 2020 and 3.22% for calendar year 2021 to fund the Medicare Advantage payment pool. We're going to get into a new section here with the wage index. We always try to start off with a refresher. The wage index data is compiled annually from Medicare cost reports and is derived primarily from the following cost report sources: salary from worksheet A, payroll, paid hours, benefit expense, and contract labor. And there are other categories, but these are the main or the primary components. There are two categories of wage index data utilized by CMS. You have the adjusted area wage index utilized by the IPPS, OPPS, and other programs, such as in California, the Medicaid or Medi-Cal program, APR DRG system uses the adjusted area wage index. The adjusted area wage index utilizes occupational mix survey data, geographic reclassifications, and rural floor budget neutrality. And then the other category is the unadjusted area wage index without occupational mix survey adjustments applied. And it's utilized by the skilled nursing programs, inpatient rehabilitation program, IRF, the psychiatric facility inpatient program, IPF, and then other payment systems, ESRD, HHA, hospice, and others. Many hospitals factored the adjusted average hourly wage into, say, Medicare Advantage and Medi-Cal managed care contracts in their rate setting process. So in short, the Medicare wage index data has a long reach into many different revenue streams. It's not just isolated to Medicare inpatient payments. There we go. CMS is proposing to continue its low wage index hospital policy that it first adopted in 2020. Under this policy, CMS makes upward adjustments to the wage indices of hospitals with wage index values below the 25th percentile. So the adjustment for each eligible hospital is equal to half of the difference between the otherwise applicable final wage index value for the hospital and the 25th percentile wage index value for all hospitals that same year. For fiscal year 2023, CMS is proposing that the 25th percentile wage index will be 0.8401. And then as in the past, CMS is proposing to fund these adjustments by making budget neutrality adjustments to the standardized amounts. So the proposed budget neutrality adjustment is 0.998205. You can see that back on one of our previous slides. However, as an update, there was a recent federal appeals court decision involving Bridgeport Hospital. This was issued on March 2nd, 2022, whereby the court decided the agency did not have the statutory authority to adopt this policy. It appears CMS is planning on appealing this decision, and if the plaintiff providers continue to prevail on the issue, the low wage index hospital policy could be eliminated permanently. This would mean hospitals that have the highest wage index values nationwide that would not be limited to the 25th percentile, and hospitals at or under the 25th percentile would not see an increase in their wage index values. So there's more to come on this topic in future rulemaking. We need to keep an eye on this. In terms of hold harmless and permanent, similar to the changes proposed to the Msdrgs, CMS is proposing to limit all wage index decreases to a permanent 5% cap annually. CMS has proposed to limit decreases on wage index values in the past, but those proposals have not been made permanent. The 5% wage index cap will be handled in a budget neutral manner annually by reducing the standardized amount. In terms of wage index geographic reclassifications, in the beginning in fiscal year 2020, the rural floor is calculated without including the wage data of hospitals that have reclassified as rural. So that's urban hospitals reclassified as rural. So CMS is continuing to apply this policy irrespective of another federal appellate court decision. Actually, I should say appellate court decision, not appellate. Federal court decision, not appellate. This involves Seven Rivers Regional Medical Center, where on April 8th, last month, a decision was rendered against CMS. And The federal court decision can be appealed by CMS. So in the meantime, CMS policy on excluding reclassified urban hospitals into the development of the rural floor calculation remains in place. On another note, some urban hospitals operate one or more remote locations in a state's rural area. So in light of this scenario, CMS wishes to clarify that rural reclassifications under 42 CFR 412.103 applies to the main campus and any remote location located in an urban area. It does not apply to remote locations in rural areas. I'm going to move on to wage index values, or what I kind of refer to sometimes as a few fun facts. CMS is proposing to use the fiscal year 2019 data for the fiscal year 2023 wage index. This represents, again, a return back to the pre-pandemic routine and schedule. The proposed fiscal year 2023 rule states that the unadjusted national average hourly wage is $47.77. When you apply the occupational mix to that, it comes down to $47.71. If that was your actual average hourly wage, that would equate to a wage index factor of 1. It's estimated that there are 192 hospitals that will receive an increase in their proposed wage index due to the application of the rural floor. The imputed floor, as applicable, will be applied for fiscal year 2023. The rural hospitals that are in the state of Alabama are proposed to receive the lowest wage index value nationwide outside of Puerto Rico at a value of 0.6556. So they have the lowest, and the highest, surprisingly, I think they're new on the block, is Vallejo, California, out in the San Francisco Bay Area. They're proposed to receive the highest wage index value nationwide at 1.8982. So with that, I'll take a break and kick it back to Amy for a polling question.
All right, thank you. Our second polling question: does your organization routinely correct wage index annually? A, yes; B, no; C, unsure; or D, not applicable? And as a reminder, if you would like to receive CPE for today's webcast, you will need to respond to at least 3 of the 4 polling questions. Okay, we'll pull up the results now. Here you go.
All right, I see we have a lot of yeses. I actually would expect that. Hopefully for those that have responded yes, that you're only making slight modifications to your wage index. CMS gives us this opportunity to make corrections to the wage index data every year, but truthfully, we should not take this for granted. Because we don't know if this correction period will always be there. So the best practice is to aim to get all of your wage index values solidified in your filed Medicare cost report if possible. For the small subset that answered no, you could be missing an opportunity here. Wage index plays a role in about 90% of your Medicare payment that you receive, and other program payments. So it's really crucial that you look at your wage index annually and try to get everything, really nailed down when you file those cost reports every year. I'm going to spend just a couple of minutes here on the Office of Management and Budget, or OMB, and what they're doing. The OMB tasked a committee to review the 2010 Metropolitan and Micropolitan area standards. These were first used in the 1950 census, and believe it or not, they're still being used today. OMB asked this committee to take a look at this and provide recommendations. The current standards are defined As such, metropolitan areas are currently defined as population centers of 50,000 people or greater. Micropolitan centers have populations between 10,000 and 49,999. And then there's counties that, with less than 10,000, they're deemed outside of the core-based statistical area. The committee issued their recommendations. They were published in January, on January 19th, 2021, so more than a year ago, and they set forth the following 6 recommendations that impact the geographical boundaries used to develop wage index factors. First recommendation is that the minimum urban area population to qualify as a metropolitan statistical area should be increased by 50,000. They also recommended to disband the New England city and town areas. They recommended that research should be undertaken on an additional territorial and exhaustive classification that covers all of the United States and Puerto Rico. And the first annual delineation update of the coming decade should be combined with the decennial-based delineations. The OMB should make publicly available a schedule for updates to the core-based statistical areas. And then finally, the OMB should continue to monitor commuting patterns. That's what that says there, number 6. The OMB would issue 3 types of updates under the committee's recommendation. They have annual updates. That's going to be something we're going to be seeing most likely in the future here. In some years, there might not be an update. They're also going to be looking at doing mid-decade updates, so every 5 years, and then finally the 10-year decennial updates, which would incorporate changes from the census counting that happens every 10 years. On this slide is a kind of a timetable we wanted to bring to your attention that shows the expected implementation dates of the OMB committee's recommendations. We note the first implementation date is approximately a year away in June of 2023. And then from there, additional implementation dates will occur in December annually. And then my last slide here is finally we have an illustration of the areas nationwide that are subject to the OMB committee's reclassification from the current metropolitan area status to a micropolitan area status. And we wanted to provide an illustration of the likely geographic areas that may experience a change in their CBSA status. The highlighted areas have a 2018 census between 50,000 and 99,999 in population. So under the OMB committee's recommendation, these highlighted areas may revert back to a micropolitan status and lose their current CBSA status. In 2018, there were 392 micropolitan areas with a census between 50,000 and 99,999 that were being treated as metropolitan areas. CMS projects 144 of those 392 areas may lose their metropolitan status and will likely be absorbed into a larger geographic area. This is really important stuff to keep tabs on as we move forward. And with that, I will turn the presentation over to Jonathan Mason.
All right, thanks, Glenn. I'm going to go pretty quickly through these Factor 1 and Factor 2 so we can get to some of the other items, but thought I'd quickly go over what the proposed rule shows. So for Factor 1, it's the dish estimate that begins with an anchor period. In this case, it's the 2019 year. You can see that it's very close to the prior year total. But you see the story here is that there's been significant changes in the roll forward factors compared to the prior year. And so the last column on the far right are the totals from last year's final rule. And you can see with each fiscal year, the spread between last year's rule and this year's total gets wider and wider, where even looking at 2022, there's over a $1.1 billion difference in dished estimates. And so the net result is a 2023 dish estimate of $13.266 billion. And so after removing the 25% empirically justified amount, that final factor one is $9.949 billion. And that's $539 million less than last year's total. So this is a trending standpoint since 2014. You can see over the last, from 2020, the numbers are going down. And then just quickly looking at factor two, this is the factor calculating the change in uninsured rate. And so after running it through the formula, factor two now equals 65.71%. So that's compared to last year's final rule of 68.57. So that's a pretty big drop. Couple that with the drop in factor one amount, hospitals are now, splitting a significantly smaller pool amount. So to get to that final UC pool calculation, you take that 65.71% uninsured rate to the $9.949 billion to derive a UC care pool of $6.538 billion. And that's distributed to about 2,380 hospitals. And so this represents a decrease of $654 million compared to last year's final rule. So you can see, kind of as a trending perspective, the UC pool started at $9 billion, steadily declined, and then there was some changes in the estimates that they used to derive the factor one and two. And so starting with 2018, 2019, you see those go up, and over the last several years, you've seen some big drops in factor one and factor two to ultimately end up at that $6.53 billion. So for the actual distribution of the pool, CMS is revising the formula and is proposing to use 2 years of S10 data to derive the factor three. In the 2022 rule, commenters expressed concern that the use of only 1 year to derive or determine the factor three would lead to significant year-over-year variations in the UC payments. So a lot of hospitals wanted multiple years being used. So in consideration of that, CMS is proposing to use the averages of the audited 2018 and 2019 reports. And they believe this proposal addresses some of those concerns. They've also decided to skip the 2020 year when determining the interim uncompensated care payments. They believe excluding that 2020 year will better reflect what a more accurate reflection of the calculation by skipping that year for those interim uncompensated care payments that you receive. So looking forward, they also not only addressed the 2023 using 2 years, they also addressed 2024 and forward, and they're proposing in 2024 to use actually 3 years of UC data to come at that calculation. They are expecting, in the proposed rule, they say that CMS expects to use the data from 2018, 2019, and 2020. So stakeholders are going to have to weigh the pros and cons of whether smoothing out the year-to-year fluctuations, kind of going to 3 years of audited data, is maybe more beneficial than obviously some of this, the 2024 calculation will be using as old as 6-year-old data to at least drive. I think it's also kind of something to point out that 2018 cost report was used to derive the entire 2022 calculation. It's being used this year to drive half the calculation, and then next year it's going to be used to drive a third of the calculation. So we also put the email address that should be used if you have any concerns or issues with your factor three inputs in that factor three table, and you're supposed to submit those questions or issues regarding your factor three to that address on the slide. Now, I'll kind of skip over this slide. I just wanted to switch gears and take a minute to talk about the latest round of S10 audits. I've just put some comments on here regarding previous questions or concerns providers have had, mostly to the consistency of the audits and how the audits are handled, and ultimately you'll see some of the responses on the slide. But I think we'll just skip forward and go to kind of the latest round of S10 results and kind of what it shows in HCRIS and what have we seen and how does it compare to prior year analysis. So this analysis we're presenting on the next few slides is basically a comparison of fiscal year 2018 and 2019 numbers between the as filed values and the revised values that are resulted from either amendments or probably more specifically the audits that have occurred this last year and the year before. So I'm going to focus this next couple slides on the 2019 audits, but I've kept the 2018 results on these because I think it's a good indication of kind of how if the audits are changing or not changing and what those results look like. So for the 2019 group, we had some, 2,165 hospitals that had revised values during the period of June 2021 and March 2022. So in an aggregate, line 30, which drives the factor 3 calculation, decreased by $1.8 billion, or basically 5.5%. And so this is uncompensated care costs removed from hospitals, resulting obviously primarily from those audits. And so to break this down a little further, looking at the reported charity charges on line 20, of the 2,100 hospitals in 2019 that had a change in line 30, a little over 1,964 reflected a change in their reported charity charges. So both uninsured and charity kind of changed, but I want to focus in on the uninsured, the insured. You can see the insured charity went down by $1.5 billion, or close to 30%. You can see that those findings are consistent with the 2018 analysis, and they seem to indicate that hospitals are still struggling to properly report deductible coinsurance and co-payments. And so while there's somewhat of a shift on the kind of the uninsured bucket, I think the real story is that insured, those are dollar for dollar changes. They're not subject to the cost of charge ratio, so that's a dollar for dollar impact on line 30, and obviously a massive hit to hospitals' calculated UC payments. So bad debts have continued to be a focus on these. You can also see that in 2019 we had a total of almost 1,900 providers that had a change, a $1.7 billion decrease for a little less than 2018, but it's a 4.34% decrease. You talk to a lot of hospitals, and I know total bad debt is sometimes not as focused or receives the same level of review as a Medicare bad debt patient. So that's just something to take note of, that we're still seeing quite a bit of decreases in bad debts as a result of these audits. And this is just to show you kind of what those previous slides actually mean in the number of a change to that line 30. You can see it's pretty consistent. It's actually gotten a little larger with the average decrease. And then obviously we still see some rather huge swings in the largest increases and decreases between what was filed and then ultimately what was settled at audit. So we also just analyzed kind of what's the difference between using maybe the two-year blend that's in the proposed rule, the 2018 and 2019, and then what if they had only used 2019 fiscal years, like they carrying forward with what they're doing right now. And honestly, we didn't see a ton of change. We on this slide, there's some largest dollar impacts by state. There's obviously winners and losers within each state. But we wanted to see how that impact. One of the biggest ones we saw was obviously in Virginia. there's a $37 million increase just by changing the methodology for the blends. But that's something to look at, probably more specifically as individual provider, but we also just wanted to show the state. And so kind of what are some next steps? MACs are currently performing all of the, or SN audits on all the 2020 fiscal years. And so providers should take another look at their 2021 cost reports to make sure they're actually, capturing the uncompensated care, making the adjustments for these audits that are ongoing right now, the previous audits that were just finished, and see if there's any changes that need to be made going forward, or any revisions, and obviously anything as filed going forward. And then my kind of last bullet point on the slide, CMS has proposed to revise the templates for DISH, charity, total bad debt, as well as Medicare bad debt. Those templates have not been finalized. That was under that alert 17 where they didn't, or transmittal 17, that they didn't actually incorporate these templates in. But from what we've heard, those templates are on the horizon. We don't know when those will be ultimately issued, but I think it's something that hospitals need to look at. Those are a lot more stringent requirements in those templates, and so I think it's a good idea to kind of look ahead to that and make sure you can accurately capture that if and when those get implemented. And then I'll pass back to Amy because I think we're at our next polling question.
All right, thank you. Our third polling question, does your organization request a complete financial impact modeling report of the IPPS proposed and final rule each year? And if so, where do you get this information? A, we don't request modeling. B, we purchase from a vendor. C, our vendor provides complimentary modeling. Or D, we are looking for a source. And while you're answering, for those that would like a copy of today's slides, you can download them from the folder that says slide deck and handouts. And we'll also be sending them via email tomorrow along with the recording of the webcast. All right, here are the results.
All right, thank you, Amy. So yeah, we've seen a kind of a mixture of answer here, and I know we've covered, a lot of these proposed changes, and knowing these proposed changes is important, but kind of knowing the actual impacts to the organization is certainly valuable as well. So we're on, for those on this slide that are kind of not modeling these payments, we'd encourage you to kind of look into that. We can certainly help you kind of in that regard. So I'll briefly go over Section 1115 waivers. I think I'm going to skip ahead to the next slide. There's been a long history of, history on this Section 1115 waivers and some recent court decisions. As Mike mentioned, there was a proposed rule last year to clarify what should and shouldn't be included, at least in terms of Medicare DISH calculation. That proposed rule was not implemented, so I think it makes more sense to kind of just go over what is in this 2023 rule. So in this rule, CMS proposes to make 3 changes related to the inclusion of these days in the DISH calculation. And as they did last year, CMS first is again proposing to exclude patient days where hospitals receive payment for services furnished to inpatients from an uncompensated care pool under a Section 1115 waiver. CMS claims that such waiver programs do not provide inpatient health coverage directly to patients or make payments on behalf of specific covered individuals. So second, and this is different than the 2022 rule, CMS has decided that patients who receive premium assistance under a 1115 waiver can be included in the Medicaid fraction as long as the assistance is equal to or greater than 90% of the cost of health insurance. And then lastly, CMS proposes to change the existing requirement that the patient receive inpatient hospital benefits under the waiver to be included in the DISH calculation to instead require that the patients receive essential health benefits as required of alternative benefit plans. And so CMS's basis for changing the standard of services is to make it easier for providers and CMS contractors to distinguish between waivers that can be included and those that cannot, such as UC pools. And so I think I'll end it there and turn it back over to Mike for some kind of additional comments and wrap it up.
Thank you, Jonathan. I am, in the interest of time, we need to get into last polling questions, so those of you seeking CPE can do that. There's a couple of slides here at the end, and they're not at the end because they're not important. They're at the end because they're issues that relate to other aspects of the program, some of which have been suspended as part of the public health emergency, some of which are coming back online. Each one of these items can consume a webinar of their own. I would encourage each of you to visit these sections of the rule and assess what this does or does not mean for 2023 and future periods. And there is some ongoing reporting requirements that are going to continue past the public health emergency related to not only COVID, but seasonal flu, but future potential pandemics. And as you can see, there's some options in here about annual reporting and daily reporting, and based on CMS estimates, the cost of hospitals, including critical access hospitals, to do that is pretty significant. So that's something that you may want to look into. So let's turn this back over to Amy. Let's get in this last polling question, and then we'll wrap up.
All right, thank you. So the fourth question, given the continued increase in regulatory reporting and reimbursement changes, bandwidth could be a challenge at many organizations. Do you plan on bidding out any reimbursement services in the future? Your options are yes, no, or I don't know. And once you've completed all CPE requirements, you will be able to download a PDF of your certificate from the CPE progress window in your console. And then also a reminder that if you attended today's presentation in a group, you will need to complete the group attendance sheet in your console as well. Leave this up another few seconds here. All right, here you go.
All right, so with that, I think it's an interesting mix. Obviously, given how important this is to hospitals, these items, inpatient and outpatient, and other the related sub-provider items, it's pretty significant dollars. So whatever assistance that you deem appropriate, I know there's resources out there that will help you. So we'll finish up with a couple of items. The main one here being the comment deadline is June 17th, 2022. So in addition to evaluating any aspects of this proposed rule that are of particular interest to you or your institution or your system, I would encourage you to also coordinate with your other advocacy partners, both inside your organization and externally, such as your state hospital association and so forth, and make sure you're heard. There's been plenty of items that come up in the future with regard to appeals and litigation that often go back to whether or not comments were submitted on those items. And I would again, I apologize for not getting to that last slide, but I would again review those programs to see what's impacting you in 2023 and what may come back online in the future, and make sure you're heard on the record. We've gotten some questions. We'll get answers out to those questions, and also included in the slide deck are some resources that can help you with some items. So I think with that, I'll leave it there. I'll thank you all for joining today, and we look forward to future presentations. Thank you.